Thank you so much, Mommy.
Enjoy your dinner, sweetheart.
Sigh.
She had a system. Every evening, while her own daughter, Peyton, sat at the dining room table with a full plate, warm pasta, fresh bread, the kind of meal that smells like someone cared enough to cook it properly. Diane Marsh walked to the back of the refrigerator and pulled out whatever had been sitting there the longest. 3-day-old rice, stiff and sour at the edges. Chicken from 5 nights ago. The color wrong. The smell something you'd notice even with the microwave door closed. Soup that had been opened, half-eaten, resealed, and forgotten for a week. She would heat it just enough to take away the obvious cold, not enough to kill what was growing in it. Then she would set it on the small table in the corner of the kitchen, not the dining room table, the corner table, the one the children called the other table, and she would call for them. Brody, Lena, come eat. Brody was 9, Lena was 7. They were the children of her husband, Derek Marsh, by his first marriage to a woman named Carla, who had died of a pulmonary embolism 18 months before Diane entered the picture. They ate what was put in front of them because children eat what they are given. They ate it in the corner while their half-sister sat at the dining room table. They ate it and went to bed and woke up and went to school and tried to learn things in classrooms while their bodies were quietly being failed by the woman their father trusted to feed them. But Diane didn't know something. She didn't know that 7-year-old Lena had started keeping a list. Not on paper. Lena was 7 and couldn't write fast enough. She kept it in her head, the way children memorize things that frighten them, the way the body holds what the mind isn't old enough to name. And she had told one person, just one. She had told her teacher, Mrs. Okafor, and Mrs. Okafor had told the school principal, and the school principal had made a phone call that Diane was absolutely not prepared for. If you believe that children carry the truth even when adults bury it, subscribe right now and hit that bell, cause what happened after that phone call was something nobody in that house saw coming. Nobody except Lena. Derek Marsh was the kind of man that other men described as solid, not flashy, not complicated. Not the kind of person who filled a room with presents or made strangers remember him from across a dinner party. Just solid. Dependable in the way that load-bearing walls are dependable. You do unnotice them until you need them. And then you realize they were holding everything up the whole time. He had grown up in Macon, Georgia, the second of 4 children in a household where money was careful and love was not. His mother, Ruth Ann, worked at the county clerk's office for 31 years. His father, James, drove trucks long haul until his back gave out, and then he drove shorter routes. They were a family that paid their bills and said grace and did you won't talk much about feelings, because feelings were not the kind of thing that helped you get through a Tuesday. Derek had taken something useful from all of that. He had taken the work ethic. He had left behind the emotional silence. Mostly. He studied civil engineering at Georgia Southern, graduated without distinction, but without debt, took a position with a mid-sized infrastructure firm in Savannah. Met Carla Reyes at a company softball game where he was playing third base badly, and she was watching from the bleachers with the specific expression of someone who found bad third playing more endearing than competence. Carla was 26. Derek was 28. They were engaged inside of a year and married inside of 2 in a ceremony that was small enough to be genuine and large enough to include everyone who mattered in a renovated barn outside of Savannah on a Saturday in October when the Georgia air was finally cool enough to be beautiful. Carla wore her grandmother's earrings. Derek cried twice, once at the altar and once during the father-daughter dance. That was Aunt his dance, but was happening 15 feet from him and ambushed him completely. They bought a house on Sycamore Drive in a quiet neighborhood outside Savannah. 4 bedrooms, a yard with a persimmon tree that dropped fruit every September, a porch that ran the full length of the front of the house and got afternoon shade from an oak that had been there longer than any house on the street. Brody was born 14 months after the wedding. Lena came 2 years after Brody. The four of them fit into the house on Sycamore Drive the way families fit into houses they have actually chosen, with some friction and some noise and a great deal of love distributed through the specific medium of ordinary days. School lunches and Saturday morning cartoons, and Derek grilling on the back porch while Carla read on the porch swing. And the children chased each other through the sprinkler in the backyard. Carla called the persimmon tree her clock. When the persimmons fall, she told the children, that means fall is here for real. And when fall is here, something good is coming. Maybe Halloween, maybe Thanksgiving, maybe just a cool morning when you can wear your favorite sweater. Something good. Brody believed this completely. Lena believed it more. Then Carla got a headache on a Wednesday in February that she described as different from other headaches. Not painful exactly. It's present in a way that was hard to explain, like pressure from inside rather than from without. She had been traveling for work, a 2-day conference in Atlanta, and she attributed the headache to dehydration in conference rooms and the particular exhaustion of having to be professionally pleasant for 48 hours straight. She flew home Thursday, collapsed at baggage claim. A pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that had traveled from her leg, where it had been forming quietly during the flight from Atlanta, to her lung, where it stopped everything. It was 41 seconds away from the paramedic who happened to be in that terminal. She did not make those 41 seconds. Derek got the call at 4:17 in the afternoon while Brody and Lena were doing homework at the kitchen table. He took the call in the backyard by the persimmon tree, because something in his body already knew that whatever was coming needed to be received outside, standing up with something solid under his feet. He was on the ground by the time the call ended. He stayed there for a long time. Then he came inside. He sat at the kitchen table between his children, and he told them in words that were simple and true, because were 7 and 5 years old, and the truth needed to be simple enough for them to hold. Mama died. There was a problem with her heart and her blood, and it happened very fast. And she wasn't in pain, and she is gone, and she is not coming back, and Daddy is here, and Daddy is not going anywhere. And you are safe, and you are loved, and we are going to be okay. Brody asked if it was his fault. Derek said no, not even a little, not even 1%, not even 1%, in a voice that was very close to breaking, but did not break because he needed his son to hear the certainty in it. Lena didn't ask anything. She climbed into Derek's lap and put both hands on his face and looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Daddy, I can feel your heart beating." He held her for a long time after that. Grief does strange things to time. The first year after Carla's death moved the way molasses moves, thick, slow, resistant, every day requiring an effort that the day before it had not prepared you for. Derek went to work. He came home. He made dinner, real dinner, actual dinner, the kind of dinner that Carla would have recognized and approved of. He attended school events and parent-teacher conferences and Saturday soccer games, and he did all of this with a specific determination. A man who understood that his children were watching him to learn whether or not the world was survivable. He showed them it was. The second year moved faster. And somewhere in the middle of the second year, Derek's colleague and occasional friend Marcus Webb, no relation to other Marcuses and other stories, invited him to a small dinner party at his house in the suburbs of Savannah, the kind of event that is ostensibly casual and is actually a gentle attempt by a married man to introduce a widowed friend to the general concept of other human beings. Diane Colton was at that dinner party. She was 34, recently relocated from Charlotte, North Carolina, working in pharmaceutical sales, attractive in the way of people who have thought carefully about how they present themselves. Hair, always done. Clothes, always intentional. Posture, always good. She had a laugh that arrived on cue, in a way of making whoever she was talking to feel that she was giving them her complete attention. She found Derek standing near the kitchen with a beer he hadn't opened, looking at a framed photograph on the wall with the expression of a man who was physically present and emotionally somewhere else entirely. she said. That's a good photo. Is that Savannah River? He said. Yeah, I used to fish there when I was young. Okay? And they talked about rivers for 20 minutes, which gradually became talking about other things, which gradually became the kind of conversation that continues in text messages, and then phone calls, and then a dinner where it's just the two of them, and the realization arrives uncomfortable and tentative that something is happening here. She was patient. She asked about Brody and Lena early and often. She said, I don't want to rush anything. I know this is complicated. I just want to be here at whatever pace makes sense. Derek appreciated this. He appreciated it because Carla had been gone 2 years and he was 37 years old, and the house on Sycamore Drive had 4 bedrooms and 3 of them felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture, and because Diane seemed to understand this without needing it explained. He introduced her to Brody and Lena 4 months into the relationship. She brought a board game, a popular one, the one with the brightly colored tiles and the simple rules. The kind of game that requires no expertise and generates natural laughter. She set it up on the living room floor and got down on her knees to play it, and lost deliberately on the first round, and did it convincingly enough that neither child questioned it. Brody warmed to her by the second round. Lena watched. Lena was 6 years old, and she watched Diane the way children watch things they haven't decided about yet. Not hostile, not warm, just attentive. She played the game. She answered questions. She did not offer anything Diane hadn't asked for. That night, when Derek tucked her in, Lena said, Daddy, does she have any kids? Derek said, she does. Actually, a daughter named Peyton. She's 8. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, is Peyton coming too? Derek said, not tonight. Maybe someday, if things keep going well. Would that be okay? Lena looked at the ceiling. She said, I don't know yet. Derek kissed her forehead and turned off the light. He should have stayed with that answer longer. He should have heard what was in it. They were married 14 months after the dinner party, and a civil ceremony at the Chatham County Courthouse followed by a small reception at the house on Sycamore Drive, where Ruth Ann, Derek's mother, made a potato salad, and his colleagues from the firm made toasts that were sincere and brief. Peyton was 8. Brody was 8. Lena was 6. 3 children from 2 families standing in the backyard of a house that was about to become something none of them had agreed to. Diane wore a cream dress. She held Derek's hand through the vows and smiled at the camera and looked, in every photograph taken that afternoon, like a woman who had found what she was looking for. Peyton stood beside her mother in every photograph. Brody and Lena stood beside their father. There was not a single photograph of all 5 of them together. No one noticed at the time. The first weeks were an adjustment, which everyone acknowledged and attributed to the expected difficulty of blending families. Diane was organized. Menus planned, schedules maintained. The house running with a new efficiency that Derek appreciated, because running a house with 2 children while working full-time had been grinding him down in ways he had and fully admitted. She divided tasks clearly. She managed the household accounts. She handled school pickups on days when Derek's project schedule ran long. She was, by every external measure, competent and present in doing the work. But there were things underneath the competence. Small things, at first. The way she arranged the seating at the dinner table so that Peyton was always beside her and Brody and Lena were always at the end, closest to the gambit. Kitchen. Not at a different table yet, but angled away, physically subordinated in an arrangement so subtle that Derek, who came home tired and hungry and grateful that dinner was on the table, didn't clock it. The way she assigned Peyton's room, the one with the best afternoon light and the window seat, while Brody's room stayed as it was, and Lena's room was quietly rearranged to accommodate a storage shelf that took up the corner where Lena had kept her stuffed animals. Nothing was said directly. Nothing needed to be said directly. The architecture of preference was being built one small decision at a time. and by the time any individual decision was large enough to name, 20 others had already become normal. The food was the thing that crossed the line from preference into something else. It started, Brody would remember later, about 3 months into the new arrangement. Not with spoiled food at first, that came later. It started with portions. Diane served dinner. Peyton got a full plate. Brody and Lena got less. Not dramatically less, not cartoonishly less, just less. A half serving of the side dish, a smaller cut of whatever protein, enough that a child would eat it and still be somewhat hungry, but not enough that a child would feel confident saying, I did get enough food, because children are not always confident naming what is happening to them, especially when the adult causing it is calm and certain, and the normal rules of the house seem to support her authority. Then the portions became quality. Peyton's food was fresh. Brody and Lena's food was not. It began with leftovers from 3 nights prior. 4 nights. Then food that had been in the refrigerator long enough that the smell when it was heated was something the children noticed but couldn't name. They were 9 and 7. They didn't have the vocabulary for the specific sour wrongness of food that has crossed the line. They just knew it didn't taste right. They just knew their stomachs hurt in the evenings, and they ate it because they were hungry, because children eat what they are given, because Diane served it with the same flat calm with which she served everything. The calm of adults is a powerful signal to children about what is normal. The stomach aches became regular. Brody missed 2 days of school in October with what the doctor, who examined him briefly and without suspicion, called a stomach bug. He missed another day in November. The doctor said some kids are just prone to GI disruptions, especially during fall virus season. Lena didn't miss school. Lena ate less. When the food tasted very wrong, she ate just enough to get through dinner without drawing Diane's attention, then went to bed hungry and lay in her room in the dark with her stomach turning and thought about her mother. She thought about the persimmon tree. She thought about what her mother had said, when the persimmons fall, something good is coming. The persimmons had fallen in September, She was still waiting for the something good, But she had started, in the precise, methodical way of a child who has understood that she needs to keep a record, even if she does not know why. To remember things, dates, what she was given, how it smelled, how her stomach felt after, what Peyton ate, what she ate. The difference. She kept it in her head. She was 7 years old, and she was building a case. By November, the corner table had become permanent. Diane moved it there one afternoon, while the children were at school, with a specificity of placement that communicated intention against the wall, slightly behind the door when the door was open, separated from the dining room by the kitchen island that made it impossible to be at the corner table and part of the dining room conversation simultaneously. When Brody asked why they were eating there, Diane said, "It's cozier. You have more space." More space was not what the corner table provided. The corner table was smaller than the dining table. It had 2 chairs for 2 children and no room for a third. Peyton sat at the dining table. Brody and Lena sat in the corner. Derek came home from work and ate at the dining table with Diane and Peyton, while his children ate 10 feet away, the kitchen corner, with food that was wrong in ways he was not present enough at meal times to observe, because Diane always had something to tell him about her day, a story or a question or a request that oriented his attention toward her and away from the corner where his children were eating. She was very good at this. She was very good at a lot of things that required managing attention. The first time Derek noticed the corner table arrangement was a Saturday when he came downstairs for breakfast and found Brody and Lena at the corner table with cereal, while Peyton ate scrambled eggs at the dining table. He said, "Why aren't you all eating together?" Diane said, from the stove. "Oh, they asked to eat there. They've made it their little spot. Haven't you guys?" Brody looked at his cereal. Lena looked at her father. She opened her mouth. Then she looked at Diane. Then she looked back at her cereal. Derek said, "Well, Come on, bring your bowls, eat together. They moved to the dining table that morning. That was the only morning they ate at the dining table for the next 6 weeks. When Derek was at work, the corner table was law. Mrs. Adays Okafor had been teaching second grade at Magnolia Elementary School in Savannah for 11 years. She had the particular quality of stillness that the best teachers develop. Listening that is physical, that occupies the whole body, that communicates to a child that what they are saying is the most important thing being said anywhere in the world right now. She had learned early in her career that children rarely say the most important thing directly. They say it sideways or in pieces, or they say something adjacent to it and wait to see if you follow. She had followed enough times to know how to wait. Lena Marsh had been in her class since September. She was a quiet child, not shy exactly, but deliberate. She thought before she spoke in a way that was unusual for 7-year-olds, most of whom said whatever arrived without editorial process. Lena edited. She chose. She was, Mrs. Okafor had thought more than once, going to be formidable someday. The thing she noticed in October was the lunchbox. Magnolia Elementary had a hot lunch program and most children participated, but some brought lunch from home. And Lena Marsh brought lunch from home every day, a small blue lunchbox with a bird on it. And Mrs. Okafor, who monitored the cafeteria on Tuesdays, noticed that Lena's lunchbox was often not very full, and that Lena ate what was in it quickly and then sat with her hands in her lap for the rest of lunch period in the specific posture of someone who is still hungry and has decided not to say so. Mrs. Okafor brought a granola bar on the second Tuesday. She set it on Lena's tray and said, "I have extras today. Do you want one?" Lena said, "Yes, please," and ate it in 4 bites. Mrs. Okafor began keeping granola bars in her desk. She began watching. In November, on a Tuesday afternoon, Lena lingered after the other children had gone to afternoon recess. She stood at Mrs. Okafor's desk with her hands folded in front of her, which was her posture for important things. Mrs. Okafor looked up. She waited. Lena said, "Mrs. Okafor, if food smells bad, does that mean it's bad?" Mrs. Okafor set down her pen. She said, "Yes, usually if food smells wrong, it means it's gone off. It means it's not safe to eat anymore." Lena nodded slowly, like she was confirming something she already knew. Mrs. Okafor said, very carefully, "Lena, is someone giving you food that smells bad?" Lena looked at the desk. "Okay," she said, "I just wanted to know if the smell means it's bad, right? If the smell means something is wrong with it, or if the smell is normal sometimes." Mrs. Okafor said, "The smell means something is wrong with it." Lena nodded again. She picked up her backpack. Said, "Thank you, Mrs. Okafor." She walked out to recess. Mrs. Okafor sat at her desk for a long time after that. Then she walked down the hall to the principal's office. Principal Anita Drummond had been running Magnolia Elementary for 8 years. She was 53 years old, originally from Augusta, Georgia, the daughter of a minister and a nurse, which meant she had grown up in a household where both the moral weight of situations and their practical consequences were taken seriously and simultaneously. She had a reputation among parents for being firm, and among teachers for being fair, and among children for being the kind of adult who looked at you directly when you talked to her. So she heard Mrs. Okafor's account. She did not dismiss it. Did not say, "Let us wait and see," or "It might be nothing," or "We do want to create a problem where there isn't one." Scu said, "I'm going to talk to Lena myself this afternoon." She also said, "Pulled Brody Marsh's attendance record for the past 3 months. I want to see how many days he's missed and what the stated reason was." She also said, "Has the school nurse seen either of these children recently?" Mrs. Okafor said, "Brody came to the nurse twice with stomach pain." Principal Drummond wrote this down. She talked to Lena at the end of the school day in her office with Mrs. Okafor present and the door slightly open the way it was always kept during child conversations. The door open as a signal that this is safe, that nothing happening in this room is hidden. She sat across from Lena, not behind her desk, in a chair at the same level, because she understood that the physical geometry of conversations with children matters. She said, "Mrs. O'Coffer told me you had a question about food today, okay? Can you tell me more about that?" Lena looked at her hands. Principal Drummond waited. Lena said, "At my house, there are 2 tables." Principal Drummond said, "Tell me about the 2 tables." And Lena told her. She told her about the corner table. She told her about Peyton's plate and her plate. She told her about the smell of the food and the stomach aches. She told her about Brody missing school. She told her about the refrigerator and the things that came out of it that had been in there too long. She told it in the precise, sequential way of a child who has been holding this information carefully, waiting for someone to ask. She named dates. She described smells with the specific vocabulary of a child, like the trash before it gets taken out, like when milk goes bad, like the back of the refrigerator when nothing gets cleaned. She described the look of the food. She described the corner of the kitchen. She described Peyton's pasta. She described her own plate. When she finished, she looked up at Principal Drummond with an expression that was exhausted and steady in equal measure. The expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has finally set it down somewhere solid. Principal Drummond looked at Mrs. Okafor. Then she looked back at Lena. She said, "Lena, you did the right thing. You were very brave telling me this, okay? I'm going to make sure you and Brody are safe, okay?" Lena said, "Is my daddy going to be in trouble?" Principal Drummond said, "No, your daddy is not in trouble, okay? But I need to make some phone calls, and I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Lena said yes. She picked up her backpack. She walked out to the car line where the after-school buses were loading. Principal Drummond picked up her phone. She called the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services. Then she called the Savannah Police Department's non-emergency line. Then she called the school district's legal counsel. Then she called her husband and told him she would be home late. The DFC's investigator who responded to Principal Drummond's report was a woman named Sandra Gaines, 44 years old, 17 years in Child Protective Services, who had developed, over those 17 years, the specific combination of empathy and steel that the job required if you were going to survive it, without either burning out or becoming numb. She arrived at Magnolia Elementary the following morning with a notebook and a calm that was not indifference, but its opposite, the calm of someone fully, completely paying attention. She interviewed Lena first, in the same office, with the same open door, with Mrs. Okafor present. She interviewed Brody separately. She asked them the same questions in different orders and listened carefully to how the answers aligned, which they did. Not because the children had coordinated, they hadn't, but because the truth is consistent in ways that fabrication is not. Brody, who was 9 and had the specific frustration of a child who has been wanting to say something for months, but had found the right door, talked for 40 minutes. He described the food. He described his stomach aches. He described the smell in specific terms that matched Lena's descriptions without being identical to them. He described one evening in October when he had gotten up from the corner table and gone to the kitchen sink and quietly, carefully, when Diane was in the other room, smelled the food on his plate and had known in the certain way that children know things they can't articulate that it was bad. And he had eaten it anyway because he was hungry and because he didn't know what else to do. He described seeing Peyton's plate. He described the pasta. He described the bread. He described what his mother used to make. He got to that part and stopped. Sandra Gaines waited. Brody said, "She used to make this thing with chicken and these little potatoes, and it smelled really good from upstairs. And I would always know what was for dinner before I came downstairs because of the smell." He paused. He said, "I can tell by smell when the food is good. My mom taught me that." Sandra Gaines wrote this down. After the interviews, she drove to the house on Sycamore Drive. Derek was at work. The children were at school. Diane answered the door in work clothes, having clearly been told by Derek that a DFC's investigator was coming. Derek had been called by the school that morning and had called Diane immediately, which meant Diane had had 4 hours to prepare. She was very composed. He offered Sandra Gaines coffee. Sandra Gaines said, "No thank you," and asked to see the kitchen. She asked to see the refrigerator. Diane said, "Of course, though I'm not sure what the children told you, but I can assure you they have always been well fed. Children exaggerate. You know how they can be." Sandra Gaines opened the refrigerator. She stood in front of it for a moment. She noted the contents. She photographed the contents. In the back of the bottom shelf, found a container of yogurt and a bag of baby carrots. A takeout container dated with a marker in Diane's own handwriting. The date was 8 days ago. A Tupperware of soup with condensation on the inside of the lid that indicated it had been opened and resealed multiple times. A package of deli meat 3 days past its printed expiration date. A container of rice, uncovered, that had dried at the edges and smelled. When Sandra Gaines leaned slightly in to confirm, exactly as Lena and Brody had described. In the main body of the refrigerator, the front shelves, fresh vegetables, a new container of pasta sauce, fresh chicken in its original packaging, dated 2 days ago, cheese in a sealed block yogurt cups with several days remaining on their expiration. The geography of the refrigerator was its own testimony. Fresh food in the front, old food in the back. Sandra Gaines photographed both. She turned to Diane. She said, "Can you tell me about your process for planning meals for the children?" And Diane, who had prepared for this conversation, smiled and said, "I try to make sure nothing goes to waste. We have a lot of leftovers, and I always make sure they get used." Sandra Gaines said, "Which children eat the leftovers?" A pause. Brief, but there. Diane said, "Everyone eats together in this house." Sandra Gaines wrote this down. She noted the time. She thanked Diane for her time. She drove back to her office and she wrote her report for 3 hours. And at the end of those 3 hours, she picked up the phone and called the Savannah Police Department and said, "I need to escalate this." Derek Marsh came home at 5:30 to find 2 police cars parked on Sycamore Drive. He sat in his vehicle for a moment. He thought about the call from the school that morning. He thought about the 4-hour gap between that call and now, during which he had reassured himself, with the specific logic of a man who needs to believe his household is not what someone is suggesting it might be, that there had been a misunderstanding, that the children were adjusting, that DFCs visited homes and found nothing concerning all the time, that Diane could not be doing what the school was suggesting. He sat in the car and looked at the 2 police cars and understood, in the wordless, certain way that understanding sometimes arrives, that there had not been a misunderstanding. He got out of the car. He walked inside. Diane was in the living room with a police officer. The second officer was in the kitchen. Sandra Gaines was at the kitchen table with her notebook. Diane's lawyer, she had called a lawyer in those 4 hours, was seated beside her. Derek stood in the doorway. Sandra Gaines looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Mr. Marsh, thank you for coming home. We need to speak with you." "Okay," Dan said. "Derek, this is completely overblown." The children exaggerated, and now Sandra Gaines said, without raising her voice, "Mrs. Marsh, please." She looked at Derek. She said, "Mr. Marsh, I have spent today with your children and in your home. I need to ask you some questions. Can we sit down?" Derek sat down. Sandra Gaines opened her notebook. Asked him about the meals in the household. She asked him about the corner table. She asked him about Brody's stomach aches and school absences. She asked him if he had ever observed a difference in the food served to his children versus the food served to Peyton. Derek answered each question as truthfully as he could, which meant that some of his answers were, "No, I didn't notice that," and some were, "I thought it was just an adjustment period," and some were long silences, during which he was doing the specific arithmetic of a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the last 8 months. The corner table. He had seen the corner table. Kay had asked about it once. He had accepted the answer. He was at the dining table. His children were 10 feet away. He had accepted the answer. Sandra Gaines placed her notebook on the table. She turned it so he could read what she had written. She said, "I need you to look at this. This is the timeline I've constructed from your children's accounts, your son's medical records from his pediatrician, his school absence records, and the contents of your refrigerator as I observed them this afternoon." Derek read. He read it the way you read, something that is reordering your understanding of a period of your own life. Not quickly, with the specific dawning horror of a man who was present for all of this and did not see it. The soup, the rice, the deli meat, the dates, the corner table, the stomach aches. His daughter had been keeping a record in her head. His 7-year-old daughter had been keeping a record in her head because nobody, scouting, else was keeping one, and she had carried it to her teacher. Because she had run out of other options, and her teacher had brought it here. And here was where it had ended up. A notebook on a kitchen table in his own house, translated into a timeline that made the last 8 months of his children's lives impossible to misread. He put his face in his hands. He stayed that way for a while. Then he looked up. He said, "Where are my children?" Sandra Gaines said, "They're at your mother's house. We contacted Ruth Ann Marsh this afternoon. They're safe." Derek nodded. He looked at Diane. She had an expression he had not seen on her before. Not the warmth, not the patience, not the composed and careful version of herself that she had been every day of the 14 months since the courthouse. She looked like someone whose calculations had stopped working. Derek said, "I want her out of this house tonight." Diane's lawyer was a man named Philip Gentry, who specialized in family law, and who, by the time Derek had finished reading Sandra Gaines's notebook and made his statement to the police, had understood that the situation his client was in was considerably more serious than the misunderstanding she had described to him on the phone 4 hours earlier. He conferred with Diane in the hallway. He came back to the table. He said, "My client would like to make clear that she disputes." Derek's attorney, a woman named Claire Nakamura, who specialized in family law from the other direction, and who had been called by Derek's mother Ruth Ann approximately 20 minutes after the police arrived, said, "Let me stop you there." She placed a folder on the table. She said, "I'd like to discuss the terms of an emergency protective order covering both Brody and Lena Marsh, to be effective immediately, prohibiting Diane Marsh from contact with the minor children, pending a full investigation. I'd also like to discuss the terms of a separation agreement, as Mr. Marsh has indicated his intention to file for divorce." Philip Gentry said, "My client," Claire Nakamura said, "has been documented by DFCS as having systematically provided spoiled and potentially hazardous food to 2 minor children in her care over a period of not less than 4 months, while providing fresh food to her own child in the same household. I have the DFCS report. I have the refrigerator photographs. I have the medical records for Brody Marsh documenting 3 gastrointestinal episodes consistent with food contamination. I have the testimony of 2 children interviewed separately whose accounts are consistent and specific." She paused. She said, "I'd like to discuss the protective order." Philip Gentry conferred with Diane again. He came back. He said, "We'll agree to the protective order pending investigation." That night, Diane Marsh left the house on Sycamore Drive with 2 suitcases and the car she had arrived with. Peyton went with her to Diane's sister's house in Augusta. The house was quiet. Derek drove to his mother's house. Ruth Ann met him at the door. She said, "There in the living room, Lena's asleep. Brody's watching television." Derek walked into the living room. Brody looked up from the television, said, "Dad." Derek sat on the floor beside the couch. He said, "I didn't know. I want you to know that I didn't know, and I'm sorry I didn't know, and that is on me. It's not on you, and it is never going to happen again." Brody looked at him for a long time, said, "I know, Dad." Then he leaned over and put his head on Derek's shoulder. On the other couch, Lena slept, one hand tucked under her chin. The stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere since she was 3 held against her chest. Derek looked at his daughter, sleeping. He looked at the rabbit. He thought about the persimmon tree. He thought about Carla. He thought, I am so sorry, baby. I am so sorry I let someone into this house who hurt them. I am so sorry I didn't see it. He sat on the floor of his mother's living room between his sleeping daughter and his son, and he stayed there for a long time. The formal investigation by the Georgia Division of Family and Children's Services took 11 weeks. In those 11 weeks, Sandra Gaines conducted 6 additional interviews, including one with Derek, one with Ruth Ann, one with Brody's pediatrician, one with the Magnolia Elementary School nurse, one with Mrs. Okafor, and one with a neighbor named Patricia Hollins, who lived 2 houses down on Sycamore Drive and who had, it turned out, seen things from her kitchen window on a number of evenings that she had not known were significant until Sandra Gaines asked her about them. Patricia Hollins was 61 years old and retired from the Savannah public school system, which meant she had spent 34 years paying attention to children and was not easily fooled about what she saw. She had seen the corner table through the kitchen window on 4 separate occasions when the back door was open in the evenings. She had seen the difference in the plates. She had thought, that doesn't look right. She had not known what to do with that thought. She told Sandra Gaines about it in 20 minutes, in the specific, relieved way of someone who has been waiting to tell someone and has finally been asked. She said, I kept thinking, it's not my place. It's their family. You don't interfere, she said. I should have interfered. Sandra Gaines said, you're interfering now. The pediatric toxicologist who reviewed Brody's medical records at the request of DFCs noted that 3 of his documented gastrointestinal episodes were consistent with mild to moderate food poisoning from bacterial contamination, the kind of contamination that occurs when food is stored incorrectly for extended periods, or when food past its safe consumption date is heated and served. Not enough to hospitalize, enough to sicken, enough to miss school. Enough, the toxicologist noted in language that was clinical and precise and absolutely devastating, to indicate a pattern of repeated exposure to unsafe food rather than isolated incidents. Sandra Gaines compiled the report. It was 47 pages. She submitted it to the Georgia DFCS supervising director. She submitted a copy to the district attorney's office. She submitted a copy to Claire Nakamura. The district attorney's office reviewed it for 9 days. Then, they filed charges. The charges filed against Diane Marsh were 2 counts of child cruelty in the 2nd degree under Georgia Code the 16th of May 70, which covers willful deprivation of necessary sustenance to a child under the age of 18, and 1 count of contributing to the deprivation of a minor. 2nd degree child cruelty in Georgia carried a penalty of 1 to 10 years. Philip Gentry, reviewing the 47-page DFC's report, the refrigerator photographs, the pediatric toxicologist's assessment, the testimony of 2 children whose accounts had never once contradicted each other across 6 months of interviews, the neighbor's eyewitness account, and the medical records documenting 3 episodes of illness consistent with food poisoning, advised his client to consider a plea agreement. Diane's first response was that the charges were absurd and that she intended to fight them. Her second response, after Philip Gentry spent 90 minutes walking her through the evidence that would be presented at trial, was a long silence. Her third response was, what does a plea agreement look like? The plea agreement, negotiated over 3 weeks between Gentry and the district attorney's office, involved Diane pleading guilty to 1 count of contributing to the deprivation of a minor, reduced charge in exchange for a suspended sentence of 3 years, 2 years of supervised probation, mandatory completion of a parenting intervention program, and a permanent order prohibiting her from serving as a caregiver to any minor child other than her biological daughter Peyton without court approval. She also agreed, as part of the civil settlement negotiated separately between Claire, Nakamura, and Gentry, to pay Derek's legal fees and to make no claim on the Sycamore Drive property, which had been Derek's before the marriage and remained solely in his name on the deed. She signed the plea agreement on a Thursday morning in a Chatham County courtroom. She did not look at Derek. She did not look at the gallery, where Ruth Ann sat in the second row with her hands folded, watching. She looked at the papers in front of her, and she signed her name, and she walked out of the courtroom with her lawyer, and she did not look back. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Diane moved to Augusta permanently, near her sister. She was not heard from again on Sycamore Drive.
On the first Monday after Brody and Lena returned to Magnolia Elementary following the investigation period, Mrs. Okafor arrived at school 45 minutes early. She rearranged her classroom. She moved Lena's desk from near the back of the room, where it had been positioned by accident of alphabetical seating, to the front left corner near the window, because Mrs. Okafor had noticed over the course of the semester that Lena did her best thinking when she could see outside, when there was light on her face and the distraction of birds in the tree beyond the glass to rest her eyes on when the thinking got hard. She put a small potted succulent on the windowsill near Lena's new desk. She put 3 granola bars in her top drawer. She was at her desk when Lena arrived. Lena walked in, saw the new desk, looked at Mrs. Okafor. Mrs. Okafor said, "I thought you might like the window." Lena set her backpack down. She said, "I do like the window." She sat down. She looked out at the tree. She said, without looking away from the window, "Mrs. Okafor, thank you for telling." Mrs. Okafor said, "Thank you for telling me." Lena looked at the tree for a moment. Then she took out her notebook and opened it to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top in her careful, deliberate handwriting, the handwriting of a child who takes words seriously. Mrs. Okafor watched her begin. She thought, formidable. She thought her mother would be proud. She thought, she already is who she is going to be.
Derek made dinner on the first night they were back at the house on Sycamore Drive. He made the chicken dish with the small potatoes. He knew how because Carla had written it down in the spiral notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer. The one with the coffee-stained cover and the handwriting that tilted when she was writing fast. And he had not opened that notebook in 2 years, but he opened it now, and he followed the recipe exactly. And when the smell came up from the pot, it filled the kitchen in a way that was almost unbearable and completely necessary. Brody came downstairs first. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and sniffed. He said, "Is that?" Derek said, "Yeah." Brody didn't say anything else. He sat at the kitchen table, not the corner table, which Derek had moved to the garage that afternoon, and which was going to the donation center in the morning. Lena came downstairs and smelled the kitchen and looked at her father, and her expression was the most complicated thing Derek had seen on a 7-year-old face. Something that was grief and relief and love and the particular sweetness of something returning that you thought was gone. She climbed onto her chair. She said, "Daddy, it smells right." Derek said, "Yeah, baby, it does." He served them at the kitchen table, full plates, real food, hot and whole and exactly right. He sat across from them and watched them eat and allowed himself for the first time in a very long time to simply be present in his own kitchen, with his own children, without anything else requiring his attention or his apology or his accounting. They ate together. Brody had seconds. Lena ate slowly, deliberately, the way she did when she wanted to stay inside a good thing as long as possible. After dinner, Brody did his homework at the table while Derek washed dishes. Lena went out to the backyard with a flashlight, which she was allowed to do until 8 o'clock, and she stood under the persimmon tree and shone the light up through the branches. Derek watched her from the kitchen window, equated a plate, put it away. He watched his daughter standing under her mother's tree in the October dark. After a while, Lena came back inside, her boots tracking in a little mud, her cheeks pink from the cold. She said, "Daddy, there are new persimmons." Derek said, "Yeah," she said. "Mama said, when the persimmons come, something good is coming." She pulled off her boots and set them by the back door. She said, "I think the good thing is that we're back." Derek set down the dish towel. He crossed the kitchen and he picked up his daughter and held her with her head against his shoulder, and her feet dangling, and he pressed his face into her hair and breathed. He said, I think you're right. Principal Anita Drummond submitted a formal proposal to the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System Board of Education 7 weeks after the Marsh case was closed. The proposal was 14 pages. It called for a structured protocol at every elementary school in the district for identifying and responding to food insecurity and nutritional neglect. In students, a protocol that included training for cafeteria staff and teachers on behavioral indicators of hunger and nutritional deprivation. A formal reporting pathway that did not require a teacher to decide alone whether a concern was significant enough to escalate, and a mandate that all elementary schools maintain a confidential food assistance program accessible to any student without parental notification required. The board approved it in 2 readings. It went into effect the following September. 3 schools in the district identified students in nutritionally compromised home situations in the first semester of the program as operation. 6 children received intervention. None of them had to figure out how to tell someone on their own. Principal Drummond framed the board's approval letter and hung it in her office beside the photograph of her mother and father and beside the small wooden sign that had been on the wall since her first year at Magnolia Elementary, a sign her predecessor had left when she retired. A sign in plain block letters that said, "Every child who comes through this door is somebody's whole world." She had read it every morning for 8 years. She read it with more weight now. Sandra Gaines closed the Marsh file on a Friday afternoon in January. She sat at her desk after the rest of the office had emptied out, and she read through it one more time, not because she needed to. The case was closed, and the outcome was documented, but because she had a practice at the end of cases involving children of reading through the full file once more before she put it away. She read Lena's initial account as recorded by Principal Drummond. She read the refrigerator inventory she had photographed. She read the pediatric toxicologist's assessment. She read Brody's interview transcript, the part about his mother and the chicken and the smell coming up from the pot. She put the file in the closed cases drawer. She sat for a moment. She had been doing this work for 17 years. She had learned in 17 years to hold the hard cases without being destroyed by them, and to hold the good outcomes without being falsely reassured by them. Because next week there would be another case, and the week after that, and the work was not a story with an ending. It was a continuous present tense of showing up. Achiro allowed herself, on this particular Friday afternoon, to sit with the outcome for a moment. 2 children, a teacher who noticed a lunchbox, a principal who picked up the phone, a neighbor who finally said what she had seen, a 7-year-old girl who kept a record in her head because nobody else was keeping one, and who found the right door and walked through it. Sandra Gaines turned off her desk lamp. She put on her coat. She walked out into a January evening in Savannah, where the air was cold and the streetlights were coming on in somewhere on Sycamore. Driver Man was making dinner in his kitchen while his children did their homework at the table, at the kitchen table. The real table, the only table in the persimmon tree in the backyard, was bare-branched and sleeping, waiting for September, waiting to drop its fruit again, waiting to tell a little girl that something good was coming. It was already here. In March, 4 months after the investigation closed, Mrs. Okafor assigned the 2nd grade class a journaling project. She called it, "Something I Know That's True." She told the children they could write anything, something they had learned, something they had noticed, something they believed, something they wanted to say. She did not read the journals out loud. She read them privately, each one, and wrote a small note in the margin of each entry before returning them. Lena's entry was 3 sentences. Mrs. Okafor read them once. Then she read them again. Then she wrote her note in the margin, folded the journal closed, and set it on top of the stack. Lena's 3 sentences were, "If something is wrong, you should tell someone, even if you are scared, because somewhere there is a person whose whole job is to listen." Mrs. Okafor's note in the margin was 4 words. You are that person. Fate doesn't come in thunder. It does announce itself with lightning, or with grand gestures, or with the kind of music that tells you something, important is about to happen. Sometimes fate is a lunchbox that isn't full enough. Sometimes it's a teacher who keeps granola bars in her desk. Sometimes it's a 7-year-old girl who keeps a record in her head because she understood, in the wordless way of children who have learned to pay attention, that the truth needed to be kept somewhere safe until someone was ready to receive it. And sometimes the most powerful thing in a room full of adults with credentials and authority and legal instruments is a child who says, carefully and precisely, "At my house, there are 2 tables. Subscribe, hit the bell, because on this channel, the children are always believed. The careful ones always find their door, and the truth has always been patient enough to wait."